Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Class 76. This class will be something of a repetition of an earlier class, which was entitled Abdu'l-Baha as Architect of the Baha'i Faith. But we're going to add a few things, and it will now, I think, become more relevant to the history we have already covered regarding the progress of the faith and the succession of Abdu'l-Baha, because now we're going to talk about the succession from Abdu'l-Baha to Shoghi Effendi. And so we're going to talk about the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha and the four major institutions that either are created, really five in a way, that are either created by Abdu'l-Baha or else defined more particularly by him under the auspices or under the umbrella, if you will, of the administrative order which Baha'u'llah alludes to and defines in the Kitab-i-Aqdas as well as in many of his other writings. So let me turn to the PowerPoint, and we'll begin the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, the Charter of a Future World Civilization. Now, this is the title that that Shoghi Effendi gave this important document, and it is included among four other charter documents. Sometimes there are listed three in number, but because the charter document for the entire administrative order or the world order Baha'u'llah is the Kitab-i-Aqdas itself, which establishes, of course, both the institutions and the laws. But the three ancillary charter documents, we have already discussed two of them. The Tablet of Carmel, in which Baha'u'llah, with a trip to Mount Carmel, the last of his four trips there, accompanied by Abdu'l-Baha, pointed out, as we've said, the place where the shrine of the Bab should be built and he should be entombed, and the place where the future Mashriq al-Azkar, our house of worship, will be built. And he describes in the Tablet of Carmel the ark, as we talked about before, which has both the meaning of ark insofar as the boat metaphor used in that beautiful document, and the ark, A-R-K, which alludes to the, the A-R-K alludes to the boat image, alluding no doubt to Noah, where you have those who come aboard the ark, the boat, are within the covenant, are saved, and those who do not, who refuse it or reject it, are devoid of this spiritual impetus. And the ARC, which is the far-flung ark, or the ark of buildings on Mount Carmel. Then, of course, as we also said, it alludes to the Ark of the Covenant of Moses. The tablets, another charter document, are the tablets of the divine plan, which we will allude to tonight, but which are really a separate document, and we will talk about those later at our next meeting. Now, our next meeting, by the way, will be 2 weeks from tonight. We will not meet next week. The tablets of the divine plan are the first teaching plans, and become the sort of umbrella under which the successive plans of the Guardian and then the House of Justice derive or are included. And then the charter document that we will look at tonight, the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, where the very specific guidelines for how these important institutions that constitute the administrative order of the Baha'i Faith are defined, their powers and authority are delineated, and the means by which they are created or elected or appointed are spelled out in detail. Before we do that, I wanted to finish up our very brief look at the life of Abdu'l-Baha, because again, we're coming to the end of the discussion of the Baha'i revelation, and we don't have time to go into great details of every detail of the life of the master and what he did. We covered last week about 4 or 5 major accomplishments and major divisions within the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha. He alone had been courted, and this is the quote from the God Passes By. He alone had been accorded the privilege of being called the Master, Agha, a master, an honor from which his father had strictly excluded all his other sons. And so he was called this from the beginning, even as Shoghi Effendi was designated as Effendi, which means sort of sir or mister. Even when he was a child, Abdu'l-Baha insisted his own parents address him with that title. Upon him, that loving and unerring father had chosen to confer the unique title of Sirullah, or the mystery of God, a designation so appropriate to one who, though essentially human and holding a station radically and fundamentally different from that occupied by Baha'u'llah, because he wasn't a manifestation, that is, Abdu'l-Baha was not, and his forerunner, the Bab, could still claim to be the perfect exemplar of his faith, to be endowed with superhuman knowledge, and pay attention to this because these are very important, and to be regarded as the stainless mirror reflecting his light. So in other words, normally the exemplar of the faith of a new religion is the founder himself. So this is a unique position that had ever occurred before, where you have an ordinary human being, ordinary in an ontological sense. He was an extraordinary human being. It was the mystery of God. To him, whilst in Adrianople, that same father had in the Suri Hasun, the tablet of the branch, referred to this sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness, as the limb of the law of God, as his most great favor unto men, as his most perfect bounty conferred upon them, as one who through whom every moldering bone is quickened, declaring that whoso turneth towards him hath turned towards God, and they who deprive themselves of the shadow of the branch are lost in the wilderness of error. To him he, again Baha'u'llah, whilst in that city, had alluded in a tablet addressed to Haji Muhammad Ibrahim Khalil, as one amongst his sons from whose tongue God will cause the signs of his power to stream forth, and as the one whom God hath specially chosen for his cause. On him at a later period, the author of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah, in a celebrated passage subsequently elucidated in the Book of My Covenant, that's the Kitab-i-Aqdas, had bestowed the function of interpreting his holy writ, proclaiming him at the same time to be the one whom God hath purposed, who hath branched from this ancient root. To him in a tablet revealed during that same period addressed to Mirza Muhammad Quli Vari, he had referred as the gulf that had branched out of this ocean, that hath encompassed all created things, and bidden his followers to turn their faces towards to it. To him on the occasion of his visit to Beirut, his father had furthermore, in a communication which he dictated to his amanuensis, paid a glowing tribute glorifying him as one round whom all names revolve, as the most mighty branch, as this ancient and immutable mystery. Now, of course, this is amazing, these wonderful titles. Again, since, as we noted last time, Abdu'l-Baha chose from among these titles to create one of his own, namely, I'm a servant to my father, Abdu'l-Baha. He it was who, in several tablets, which Baha'u'llah himself had penned, had been personally addressed, and this is so sweet. You get just a glimpse, just from this phrase alone, of the intimacy of the relationship between the father and son, who spent every minute of their lives together from the time of Baha'u'llah's imprisonment in the Siyachal and until the death of Baha'u'llah. The apple of mine eye, and had been referred to as a shield unto all who are in heaven and earth, as a shelter for all mankind, and a stronghold for whosoever hath believed in God. It was on his behalf that his father, in a prayer revealed in his honor, had supplicated God to render him victorious and to ordain for him, as well as for them that love him, the things destined by the Almighty for his messengers and the trustees of his revelation. And finally, in yet another tablet, these weighty words had been recorded. The glory of God rest upon thee, and upon whosoever serveth thee and circleth round thee. Woe, great woe, betide him that opposeth and injureth thee. Well is it with him that swear fealty to thee. And the fire of hell torment him who is thy enemy. And of course, we talked about this a great deal last time, about how his half-brother was such an enemy and indeed suffered the consequences of his rebellion. And now, to crown the inestimable honors, privileges, and benefits showered upon him in ever-increasing abundance throughout the 40 years of his father's ministry in Baghdad, in Adrianople, and in Akkad, he had been elevated to the high office of center of Baha'u'llah's covenant and been made the successor of the manifestation of God himself, a position that was to empower him to impart an extraordinary impetus to the international expansion of his father's faith, to amplify its doctrine, to beat down every barrier that would obstruct its march, and to call into being and delineate the features of its administrative order, the child of the covenant, and the harbinger of that world order whose establishment must needs signalize the advent of the golden age of the Baha'i dispensation. So you see how critical, even before he wrote the document we're studying tonight, the Will and Testament, where he does these things, Baha'u'llah foreshadowed that he would do them and that it was upon him this duty, this honor, but this incredible burden that he create the means by which the faith would succeed. So what are some of the works you might look at in addition to this short class we're having tonight, just surveying some of the aspects of the Will and Testament and its importance? The tablets of the divine plan themselves, of course, are available online. The Baha'i online repository of all the works of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha that have been authoritatively translated. The Will and Testament itself, the work that we mentioned last time, The Child of the Covenant, a study guide to the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha by Adib Tahirzadeh. The Declaration of Trust and Bylaws of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, which are replicated on the local level by the bylaws of the local spiritual assembly. Now, these were not totally spelled out by Abdu'l-Baha. They were generally spelled out, but as we discussed last time, well, we'll discuss it tonight more fully, but suffice to say, at the time of the death of Abdu'l-Baha, The Baha'is throughout the world at that point presumed that all of the communities would elect the House of Justice. And they find out in the Will and Testament that no, that first you have to create national spiritual assemblies who will be the electorate to put the elect the Universal House of Justice. My own work, God's Plan for Planet Earth in Your Neighborhood, is a good work for studying how this evolves, the administrative order in a lot of detail, including charts. The Rui Institute Study Circle Book 8 is a very good study circle for studying the covenant and the transition from Baha'u'llah to Abdu'l-Baha, from Abdu'l-Baha to Shoghi Effendi, from Shoghi Effendi to the hands of the cause, who were the custodians of the cause, the stewards of the cause, as Shoghi Effendi designated them, and finally the election of the House of Justice. The Shoghi Effendi's work called The Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which is included at the first part of the book, The Administration, Baha'i Administration by Shoghi Effendi. The Constitution of the House of Justice, which is written not by Abdu'l-Baha or Shoghi Effendi, but by the House of Justice itself, is another document well worth reading. The Universal House of Justice, the Institution of the Counselors, which is another booklet. It's not terribly long, but spelling out how they're to be appointed, what their duties are, and so forth. So, what were the institutions that we're going to talk about tonight that this document, the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, created, and why are they so critical? Suffice to say that Baha'i Faith wouldn't exist if he had not created them. The first one is the guardianship. Now, the guardianship is an institution. It's not just one individual, Shoghi Effendi, that turned out that there would only be one guardian for reasons we will explain. But the how the guardian would be appointed, what the guardian's power and authority were all spelled out in the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, because nobody knew that this institution would be created. So, the guardianship, what Shoghi Effendi and the Baha'is expected, that is at the death of Abdu'l-Baha, when they read the Will and Testament. Because Shoghi Effendi, if you will remember, those of you who know a little of Baha'i history, he was in England at the time when he got the message that the Abdu'l-Baha had passed on. And it was an incredible shock to his system in many ways. According to Leroy Ois's talk, which I hope you will look at, it's online, it's called In the Days of the Guardian, and you can Google it and you can read it in full and hear him give that talk. And Ruhiya Khanum, in her book, The Priceless Pearl, which is a biography of Shoghi Effendi, had had no foreknowledge of the existence of the institution of the guardianship, least of all that he was appointed as guardian. That the most he had expected was that perhaps because he was the eldest grandson, Abdu'l-Baha might have left instructions as to how the Universal House of Justice was to be elected, and he might have been designated the one to see that these were carried out and act as a convener of the gathering which would elect it. That's what everyone expected, and that's what the Shoghi Effendi himself expected. And this is a passage of words that Shoghi Effendi told to Leroy Ois that he repeats in that talk. When he returned to the Holy Land, he had in mind from the things which Abdu'l-Baha had said to him, and I am now telling you what he said, that I had in mind that Abdu'l-Baha would give me the honor of calling the great together the great conclave, which he would elect the House of Justice, And I had thought in his will and testament that that probably was what he was instructing to be done. But of course, what he discovered upon reading the will, and this is on January the 3rd, 1922, a few months after the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, they read the will. Oh, my love, and this is what he read in the will. Oh, my loving friends, after the passing away of this wronged one, it is incumbent upon the Agsan, the Afnan of the sacred lote tree, the hands of the cause of God, and the loved ones of the Abha beauty, to turn unto Shoghi Effendi, the youthful branch from the two hallowed sacred lote trees, and the fruit grown from the union of the two offshoots of the tree of holiness. And he's talking about the fact that Shoghi Effendi was descended both from Abdu'l-Baha, he was the great-grandson of Abdu'l-Baha, of Baha'u'llah, and he was also a descendant of the Bab. He was an Afnan. As he is the sign of God, the chosen branch, the guardian of the cause, he unto whom all the Agsan, the Afnan, the hands of the cause of God, and his loved ones must turn. So imagine that, a 24-year-old young man whose goal in life was to become acutely educated in English translations from the Persian and the Arabic, and had gone to several universities, graduate work at Oxford University, to learn. This is why he was so adept in both English and Persian and Arabic. And he thought that he would be a translator or a secretary to Abdu'l-Baha, and lo and behold, the love of his life, Abdu'l-Baha, passed away while he was gone. So what is the guardianship according to, and then these are the quotes from the will and testament that I have excerpted out. Some of my words, but the quotes are in quotation marks that are direct passages. The first one is the authority. What is the authority of the guardian? For he is, after Abdu'l-Baha, the guardian of the cause of God, the Afnan, the hands of the cause, and the beloved of the Lord must obey him and turn unto him. He that obeyeth him not hath not obeyed God. He that turneth away from him hath turned away from God. And he that denieth him hath denied the true one. So that's pretty straightforward and powerful. But again, imagine, as I say, a 24-year-old young man, as adept as he was, finding that the future of the faith that he had served and brought up to adore was now on his shoulders. It would succeed or fail according to what he did. And of course, believing as he did, as most Baha'is do, that the future of world civilization depends on the progress of the faith, he in some level, he's realizing, my gosh, the future of human civilization, as foretold by Baha'u'llah, is in my hands. If I don't do this right, you understand where I'm going with that. So that was his authority, that whatever he said was to be obeyed. A second aspect of that authority, or one aspect of it, is he was the infallible interpreter of the text. He is the expounder of the words of God, and after him will succeed his firstborn of his lineal descendants. And so this is the first indication of how the guardianship would succeed after Shoghi Effendi. He would choose one among his firstborn lineal descendants. He would also serve as the president of the Universal House of Justice. The guardian of the cause is the sacred head and distinguished member for life of that body. Now, as we'll find out later, this doesn't mean he had any more say-so on the House of Justice. He would simply be one among the members, but present, because as you know, the president or chairperson of any Baha'i body has no more authority than the other members. He simply convenes the meeting and directs the consultation. So he had two entirely different duties here. One was to direct the affairs of the cause, and the other was to be head of the House of Justice. So he was an interpreter or translator of the Holy Word. So he was the source of guidance in that sense, but also the head of the main administrative body. During his life, he would be both director of the cause, the executor, and the source of learning, the infallible understanding of the text. Succession. So now this becomes very important because inasmuch as Shoghi Effendi had no lineal descendants, and there were no other lineal descendants of Baha'u'llah who were still in the cause, there could be no further guardian appointed because of these conditions set down by Abdu'l-Baha. And here's what they are. First, the firstborn, O ye beloved of God, is incumbent upon the guardian of the cause to appoint in his own lifetime him that shall become his successor, that differences may not arise after his passing. He that is appointed must manifest in himself detachment from all worldly things, must be the essence of purity, must show in himself the fear of God, knowledge, wisdom, and learning. Another branch, thus, should the first, and that's my writing, he can choose another branch should this firstborn not demonstrate these qualities. Thus, should the firstborn of the guardian of the cause of God not manifest in himself the truth of the words, the child is the secret essence of its sire, that is, should he not inherit the spiritual within him, the guardian of the cause of God and his glorious lineage not be matched with a goodly character, then must he, the guardian of the cause, choose another branch to succeed him. Now that branch could be referring to another child of the guardian or another branch, another Agsan, a branch of Baha'u'llah. He must be approved, and this is another condition. He must be approved by the 9-membered body of the Hands of Cause. Now, this is a second institution. Now, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We have to, because one way that the guardianship would be succeeded would be if the Hands of the Cause elect from among themselves 9 members who would serve as the administrative body of the Hands of the Cause, and they must approve of the guardian's choice. So this is sort of the checks and balances insofar as succession is concerned. The election of these 9 must be carried out either unanimously or by majority from the company of the Hands of Cause. And these, whether unanimously or by majority vote, must give their assent to the choice of the one whom the guardian of the cause hath chosen as his successor. This assent must be given in such wise as the assenting and dissenting voices may not be distinguished. And this means secret ballot. Now, this becomes the standard for all Baha'i elections, that there are no nominations, there is no electioneering, secret ballot, secret vote, nobody knows who votes for whom, and so on. So this would have to be done by secret ballot. So this brings us to a further definition of the Hands of the Cause. Who were they to be, and how would they come into being? Now, Abdu'l-Baha never appointed Hands of the Cause, but he did acknowledge some individuals who had that title, and that were designated as such by Baha'u'llah. O friends, the Hands of the Cause must be nominated and appointed by the guardian of the cause of God. All must be under his shadow and obey his command. Should any within or without the company of the hands of the cause of God disobey and seek division, the wrath of God and his vengeance will be upon him, for he will have caused a breach in the true faith of God. And of course, this happens with Mason Remy. That's the only time you have a hand of the cause who attempts to cause a breach in the faith. What is their authority? The body of the hands of the cause is under the direction of the guardian of the cause. He must continually urge them to strive and endeavor to the utmost of their ability. And here's their charge, if you will, to diffuse the sweet savors of God, in other words, to teach, and to guide all the peoples of the world, for it is the light of divine guidance that causeth all the universe to be illumined. So they are to teach the cause and teach the others how to teach. What is their other functions? My object is to show that the hands of the cause must be ever watchful, and so soon as they find anyone beginning to oppose and protest against the guardian of the cause, cast him out from the congregation of the people of Baha, and in no wise accept any excuse from him. In other words, if someone should try to do what was done to Baha'u'llah and to Abdu'l-Baha to take his place or claim that he didn't have this authority, because we know from last week that happened. It happened with George Kirillov. And so the hands of the cause are the ones who should have this second duty, first to teach, and secondly, to guard the cause. So you had two functions of the hands, to teach the cause and teach others to teach the cause, and to protect the cause. Secondly, and this is the creation of the institution of the hands of the cause, their collective authority. The hands of the cause of God must elect from their own number 9 persons that shall at all times be occupied in the important services in the work of the guardian of the cause. The election of these 9 must be carried out, so forth. We've already read that, so that must be done by secret ballot, either unanimously or majority vote. Succession of the hands of cause. So how can you have further hands of the cause? The only way you can have hands of the cause is by appointment by the guardian. And of course, the guardian didn't appoint hands of the cause until much later in his ministry. And we'll look at that later at another class. So 3 or 4 contingents. Some he appointed posthumously as having had that honor, but most of the hands of the cause who became the stewards of the faith upon Shoghi Effendi's death in 1957 were appointed by Shoghi Effendi in 3 contingents, really 4 if you consider the first group. Thus, the Continental Board of Counselors was created to carry out the function as their number diminished. Now, this is getting way ahead of ourselves. This occurs much later in the evolution of the administrative order. So in other words, the function of the hands, once Shoghi Effendi died and the hands of the cause themselves became elderly and diminished in number, you had to have the function of that institution carry it out. That is the directing of the teaching of the cause and the protection of the cause. And that's when the Continental Boards of Counselors was created. And we'll see how that occurs as we go through the evolution of the administrative order. Not tonight, but we will in the future. And so that's how that institution came about and still exists as they are appointed by the House of Justice, and they, of course, have the center in the Holy Land, the National Teaching Center on Mount Carmel. Now we come to the third institution, the Universal House of Justice. And this is extremely important insofar as how they are elected and insofar as what their authority is, because this has become much discussed over the years in great detail. How established and why it could not happen immediately upon the death of Abdu'l-Baha. Well, I've already said the reason it couldn't happen is because they're elected by the National Spiritual Assemblies. There were no National Spiritual Assemblies. There were spiritual assemblies throughout the world, but there were no National Spiritual Assemblies because that institution hadn't even been suggested. The Universal House of Justice is to be universally elected and established. Now, how can I say universally elected, universal suffrage, when they are elected by the NSAs? Well, because the NSAs are elected by the individual believers. So each individual believers has a part in this three-tiered process of electing the House of Justice. The individual believers, we just went through an election where we elected the delegates for our unit to go to the National Convention. At the National Convention, those delegates will then elect the National Assembly. And every 5 years, the National Spiritual Assemblies will go to the Holy Land from all the places in the world that have National Assemblies and elect the new House of Justice. So that three-tiered process is what Abdu'l-Baha has set in motion here. Establishing these secondary houses of justice, we now call them national, but the fact is they're not all national. You have a National Spiritual Assembly of Hawaii, of Alaska, and so on. And so it's not strictly according to a nation state. It's according to how the House of Justice designate which territories could have a secondary House of Justice. So their future title of the local and the secondary and the international will be the local House of Justice, the secondary House of Justice, and the international or universal House of Justice. So the three-tiered process again, the delegates elect the NSA, which elect the Universal House of Justice. So that's 1, 2, 3, because you elect the delegate. Structure, the men of the House of Justice. You had the question of, is Baha'u'llah in this passage talking about the men of the House of Justice as individual people, or does he literally mean it should be men? And this was explained by Abdu'l-Baha, that this means that for this dispensation, only men will serve on the House of Justice. Now, of course, the question immediately arises, why only men? Is this when Baha'is believe in, and Baha'u'llah teaches very forthrightly, the equality of men and women, and Abdu'l-Baha explains it in greater detail, that even in some instances or some categories, women are superior to men, but in no way are they to be left behind, says Abdu'l-Baha. So Abdu'l-Baha explains that there is a reason for it, that is when you understand it, will be as clear as the sun at midday or noonday. But he didn't say what it was. Because obviously it wasn't timely. So what we do know is whatever the reason is, it has nothing to do with the mental or physical capacity of women. It has to do with some circumstances that are obtained now that will not obtain in the future. So there is no chair of the House of Justice. Why? Because the guardian was to be the chair and its sacred head and the distinguished member for life of that body. Should he not attend in its deliberations, he must appoint someone to represent him. And of course, because of the death of the guardian, before the House of Justice was elected, there is now, they rotate the chairmanship of that body. What is their authority? What authority does the House of Justice have? Unto the most holy book everyone must turn, and all that is not expressly recorded therein must be referred to the Universal House of Justice. So they can make decisions about or laws about anything that is not expressly referred to in the Kitab-i-Aqdas. That which this body, whether unanimously or by majority vote, doth carry, that is verily the truth and the purpose of God himself. So in other words, whatever they decide is the truth and purpose of God, which we can interpret as infallible. So whatever they decide is beyond question. Whoso doth deviate therefrom is verily not of them that is of them that love discord, hath shown forth malice and turned away from the Lord of the covenant. So their authority is final, and it is not just the final. In other words, there came some time ago a question of, well, does this mean that they really what they decide is the truth and of God, or does it simply mean the buck stops here? You don't question what they say. And it's made absolutely clear in the Will and Testament that they are, as you see in that highlighted passage, freed from all error, meaning whatsoever they decide is of God. And you can say, well, how can that be? Because they are fallible individuals. They are certainly probably very spiritual individuals, because someone has thought them sufficiently competent and capable and spiritual that they have been elected to this high office. And there's no power with that individually. We dare say hardly anyone listening to me, either here in our meeting or who listen to these programs, could name the present day members of the House of Justice. So there's no fame. You don't make individual decisions. It's the decision of the body. And so you're sort of giving away your life, as it were, when you are elected to that body. But at any rate, let's see what is meant by infallibility, because it doesn't mean the buck stops here. It means whatsoever they decide is freed from error. It is incumbent upon these members of the Universal House of Justice to gather in a certain place and deliberate upon all problems which have caused difference, questions that are obscure, and matters not expressly recorded in the book capitalized here, and that means the holy writings. Whatsoever they decide has the same effect as the text itself. So whatever they decide, there's no degrees of infallibility. Something is either infallible or it's not. There's no degrees of authority between their decisions and the decisions of Baha'u'llah or Abdu'l-Baha or Shoghi Effendi, the text itself. And now concerning the House of Justice, which God hath ordained as the source of all good and freed from all error, it must be elected by universal suffrage, that is, by the believers. And we just discussed how that takes place. Because it has the same authority as the text, believers can't pick and choose any more than they can the laws and guidance of Baha'u'llah. They can't say, well, I like that decision, I don't like this decision. And since the House of Justice, of course, is the one devising these teaching plans, we must look upon these teaching plans as having this same authority and weight. So every 5 years, you have this three-tiered election. Now we come to the National Spiritual Assemblies. This is the fourth institution created by Abdu'l-Baha. How are they elected? Indirectly by representatives of the United States. Unlike some of the National Assemblies, the Guardians specifically said that they would have 171 delegates to be apportioned according to Baha'i population. So every delegate represents a certain number of Baha'is, and so how many delegates a particular electoral unit elects depends on how many Baha'is are there, though as much as possible, the National Spiritual Assembly has tried to apportion the electoral districts so they all have more or less an equal number of Baha'is. And you can see that number is derived by 9 times 19. And so its authority and laws and so forth were devised later under the guidance of Shoghi Effendi. It was sort of the model, the paradigm for this. The bylaws were devised when the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States was devised, and that became the model for all other national assemblies. What is their function? By this house is meant the universal house of justice that is in all countries. A secondary house of justice must be instituted, and these secondary houses of justice must elect the members of the universal one. So this repeats what we've already said. So they become what is called the pillars of the house of justice because they uphold that institution. And so one of the first things Shoghi Effendi realizes he has to do is spread the faith throughout the world as much as he possibly can. So you have a lot of pillars, because the more pillars you have, the more representation you have of the Baha'i community, the stronger the edifice will be. Their function, the secondary houses of justice, is to carry out the administration of the faith and implement the teaching plans, goals assigned to it by the Universal House of Justice. Now, right now in the 9-year plan, you have the same objectives assigned to everyone throughout the world, but at different times in different teaching plans, you had particular nations that were assigned specific goals and so forth. And so you have then the guardianship, the Universal House of Justice, the secondary houses of justice, and the hands of the cause as the institutions that were created by the single document, the will and testament. Not all the details of how the national assemblies, their bylaws and so on, but these had to come later. But the institutions, the foundation of them derives from the single charter document. And you see why it's called a charter document. Now, this is a chart I put together. It's not authoritative as such. But you see, you have these twin institutions of teaching on the one hand and administration on the other, these twin pillars that uphold the institution of the faith, and really of all religions, even though some of them didn't make it. Either the administrative institutions started to war with each other, or the administrative institutions argued with the clerics who were deciding what the teachings meant. Well, you don't have that in the faith. Now, notice in Baha'u'llah, both institutions were embodied. So he was both the authoritative giver of the law, and he was the one guiding the teaching. The same fact of these twin duties were embodied in Abdu'l-Baha. And finally, these same two duties were embodied in the guardianship, in the guardian. Though he began to create the hands of the cause, he started creating the teaching pillar or branch. So now you have the guardianship still exists, even though the guardian is not there, because the thousands of documents that the guardian wrote and the words that he translated constitute the guidance for the House of Justice. So his infallible interpretations of the writings, together with those of Abdu'l-Baha, are the guidance that the House of Justice consults before they make a decision about anything. Then the House of Justice will appoint or give information or guidance to or jobs for the National Spiritual Assemblies. And then the National Spiritual Assemblies oversee both the regional councils, and we'll get to that in a minute, and the local spiritual assemblies. And then on the other pillar, you have what were the hands of the cause. And now you have the International Teaching Center in Haifa, where you have 9 counselors who oversee that body and take their guidance from the House of Justice. And they send out and appoint the continental boards of counselors for every continent, who under them you have their auxiliary board members. Some are auxiliary board members for teaching and some for protection of the cause, though they're all doing the same thing. And then you have what is called the cluster, which is created. And you can see that that combines individual Baha'is, registered Baha'i groups, local spiritual assemblies, even non-Baha'is are considered in that cluster part of this loosely defined organization. Now, this isn't an administrative body per se. This is for teaching purposes, to designate where you have definable groups of communities together. Well, I'm not going to try to explain all of this here. This is the way it appears in the book I wrote. It's a little better defined, and you can see that some of these lines represent authority, and the darker lines are authority, some are communication. And if you spell out all the inner workings, you'll see it's very much like a spider web, that everything is related to everything else. It's very organic, as it were. And so if you are an individual and you want to talk to an auxiliary board member, you can do it. If you're an individual and you want to go to your local assembly and ask them a question or ask them to do something, you can do that. If you want to go to the National Spiritual Assembly and appeal something that your local assembly has done, or do something very positive, suggest something, you can do it. If you ultimately want to appeal to the House of Justice about a matter, ask a question, you can do it. Again, questions are very important in the faith, as we've seen throughout this course. And so many of the letters of the House of Justice giving guidance, even as the letters of the Guardian and of Abdu'l-Baha and the works of Baha'u'llah were answering questions that individual believers had posed to Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi, and now to the House of Justice. So finally, the last institution, and I guess it's more than an institution, but the instigation of the concept of teaching plans was instigated by Abdu'l-Baha with the tablets of the divine plan. And so you can see here, under the auspices of, or under the umbrella of that, you have 3 plans that Shoghi Effendi revealed, or revealed isn't the proper word, that he devised, he planned out. The last one, the 10-year World Crusade, for the purpose of preparing to elect the House of Justice. And then you have these 7 plans of the House of Justice through 2001, and then you have a series of 5-year plans from 2001 to 2021, and we are now in the under the umbrella of the teaching plan for 2022, this year, for the next 9 years, the 9-year plan. And you have this, which I like very much. There's a chart showing how all of this works, from the Baha'i cycle, which is to endure for more than 500,000 years, the Baha'i era, or in other words, this religious dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which will last at least 1,000 years. And you can see that here, excuse me. And then you've got the various ages, 3 ages: the heroic age, which ends with the death of Abdu'l-Baha; the formative age, which began with the death of, or with the guidance of Shoghi Effendi, and then the golden age, which will arrive whenever it arrives. This same chart is done in more detail, and this is almost unreadable because the print is so small. But this is a page out of the booklet that each of you should have received from the Baha'i Distribution Service. It's the last page, and it does the same thing, only even more detail. And you can see here's the 9-year plan right here. Well, I hurried through it, and yet it still took me more time than we usually take because it's such important information that we know, because this isn't just history. This is our present circumstances of utilizing these organizations that were put together, the superstructure and the infrastructure of the Baha'i Administrative Order.